Success doesn't always come easy in this industry. On today's episode of Driven Too Far, we're talking about transitioning back to a company driver. Hello, I'm Andrew Winkler with Chief Carriers, and this is Driven Too Far, the truth about trucking, a podcast that helps over-the-road truck drivers balance career and family. Welcome back to Driven Too Far. On today's episode, we're talking about the other transition, and that's transitioning from an owner-operator back to a company driver. So we spend a lot of time on the podcast talking about the transition from company driver to independent contractor. But today I want to focus on the exact opposite of that. Let's flip that switch a little bit and let's talk about what happens when a lease op gives up his truck and needs to go back into a company driver seat. One of the things I've always talked about is the mindset that we try to get the driver to change when they go from company driver to lease op. They have to think more independently. They have to think like a small business owner. And they just have to treat it different. Their focus is on revenue per day on that asset, that truck they're moving. And they're really out there trying to manage things that doesn't have a lot of structure. So it takes a lot of personal accountability. They have to be consistent, be able to manage money, a lot of those things. But sometimes things don't work out, right? I've run into a handful of lease ops over the years that even go through my education class where they've been a lease op at a different carrier and it didn't work out. So I'm always curious about that. We talk about it usually, and I just leave the floor open to them. And I says, well, tell me about that. What was your experience like? And why do you feel like it didn't work out? So it's interesting, some of the stories you hear. Not everybody can do that and say, you know what, I made a lot of mistakes. It was my first time leasing a truck. I wasn't disciplined like I needed to be. I wasn't saving money like I needed to be for repairs and taxes and those things. And ultimately, when things slowed down or the truck broke down, I didn't have any money to repair it. So that's some of the things I would expect to hear, but it doesn't happen that often. More often than not, what I usually hear is, oh, that company was bad, or that company didn't set me up for success. That could certainly happen. There's no doubt that there's some shady ones out there. They're running lease programs, and their focus is to make the company more money than it is to take care of the independent contractor and set them up for success. So while I certainly know that happens, I don't think that's the excuse every time. But this is why I think it's important to talk about this reverse transition. We hire drivers and we won't admit anybody directly into our lease program. We always tell them 90 days as a company driver. And then if things are going well, if both parties fit each other and we think this is a good fit, a good marriage, then we'll talk about the lease program and we'll roll them into that. We've just learned over time that when you try to let somebody jump directly into a lease program, a lot of times they're really desperate for money and they don't always make the best decisions. They haven't got a feel for your company and the way you run freight, how to work with that new dispatcher and things like that. So under the company driver, it just seems like it's a better fit because you're not as worried as much, right? When you're a company driver, let's just admit it, things are pretty much taken care of you. You got to show up, you got to get in the seat, you got to operate the truck safely, deliver on time, pick up on time, and go home and collect your paycheck. Everything else about the truck, the money, the safety, all that stuff is handled for you. So we think that's a better environment to get people settled in with before we take that next step. But I'll just share a story with you here of a recent hire that came. He was apparently an owner op, maybe even owned a couple trucks, small fleet of his own, I think. And he is extremely critical of everything we do. Now he's still a company guy and he's not made a transition. I don't even know if he's asked to make a transition to the lease program. But what I'm seeing as a company driver is definitely some red flags. He's a little disrespectful. He's certainly critical of everything, the way dispatch operates, the way the shop operates. He is not giving us a chance. So one thing I think you have to recognize, if we're being honest, let's be honest about this. If you failed as an owner operator, were your ways and your methods really that great? Now you can blame that on the old carrier or whoever. You can play the victim card that you didn't have anything to do with it. It was all these other circumstances that sunk your ship, but I doubt that's reality. I'm going to guess you had a significant part in that failure, because I know if you're successful, you're certainly going to take the credit for that. So when we fail, that's an opportunity to learn. Doesn't mean you can't be a successful contractor, owner, operator. But I think what I would do if I approached a company and I was new to it, I'd walk through the door with a little bit of humility. I'd be pretty humble. In fact, I'm the kind of guy that I don't share a lot of my past with people. I'm pretty quiet that way. So if I would walk in, I wouldn't be sitting in orientation telling all these stories about how it was when I was a lease op or an owner op. Because to me, if I heard somebody tell me that story and then they're coming through the door as a company driver, I'd probably question some things like, okay, so then why are you coming here through our door as a company driver to find stability again? It's a really good question. So I'd caution you a little bit, I guess, about being a bull in the china shop type thing. It's not unusual that you're going to question. Obviously, this company is going to run things different than maybe your previous company or the way you were used to doing it. But how about we sit back and we observe a little bit? And how about we get curious? If you have a question of why they do something the way they do it, then just ask. Your driver manager may not know, right? They may not know enough about the inner workings of everything, of why the policies are the way they are. But I bet your operations manager knows. I bet the CEO or the president or the GM knows. So somebody would likely share that with you if you approached it right. So rather than go in like the bull in the china shop, like we said in orientation, and start telling big stories and thinking you know more than everybody else does. And by the way, we've been in business for 50 plus years. So it's not like we're new to this trucking gig. If you would ask around to the people that work in the business, there's a lot of experience in here. So keep that in mind and be respectful with that. Nothing wrong with asking questions, but just keep that in mind before you start throwing your opinions around and your ways around like they're superior. Because the reality is, if they were superior, again, you probably wouldn't be sitting in our orientation right now. Instead, let's think of it as a time to reset. So you did the lease op program somewhere else and it didn't work. And I'm sure they had a hand in it too, right? Low miles, maybe the truck wasn't set up for success or their maintenance program didn't help you, kind of left you out there on your own. Those can certainly happen. But I'm going to guess you had a part in it too. So let's walk in, let's be humble, let's be curious. Let's try to figure out how this organization runs their program. And if it's better, maybe it's not. Maybe you can improve on it yourself, but you don't need to walk in with an attitude that you're running over the top of everybody that's already worked in this business for a long time, that knows how to run a trucking company successfully, and try to convince them that you're smarter than they are. That just doesn't work, and it never has. So if you want to earn respect, let's show it first. And if you want to build a good reputation with that new company, then let's earn that. Let's not come in and be disruptive to everything. That's probably the best advice I can give you. We certainly, I think for the drivers that come through our lease program, for the most part, they're there to learn. We put them through extra education. We can talk openly about things. They have questions of where maybe they failed before and how we can help them through that so they don't repeat. But every once in a while, unfortunately, we get somebody that just thinks they know a little bit more than the rest of us, and it just almost never works out. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Driven Too Far. Did you know that driving jobs are only about half the jobs available in this industry? For more information, check out the show notes.